Hello, thank you for joining us. Hey, this is William Steele with William Steele, True Crime, Steal the Spotlight, and now we have Steal the Spotlight Public Relations Firm, which we already are picking up clients, and thank you for that. If you want incredible public relations representation and press releases that get attention and are attached to my name with millions of fans, reach out. Also, if you want to become a sponsor on Steal the Spotlight TV and radio, you can do that. You could become an underwriter. We have 30-second spots available. Inmate to Roommate now has 11, 12 million views on TikTok. I'm not allowed to discuss formally a season 2. Just pay attention. We have something really special going on starting today, so I'm not going to leave you hanging much longer. We have retired ATF agent IGNACIO Esteban. Ignacio has written, close to 70 books?
Over 70.
Over 70 already. So since he's got, I was going to say since he got released from ATF, because that's me. He got released from prison since he's retired. So in his retirement, he's become a prolific writer, mostly on cases, but even on tennis is one of his other loves, another book on politics. And of course, his autobiography, ATF Undercover, phenomenal book. I was blessed to be able to get a copy of that from him. Yeah. And it's really an incredible ride through the ins and outs of ATF. So this is a man who tells it like it is. Rumors have it we can't talk too much about what's being pursued vigorously, but possibly drama series and movies about this man's life and career. I am honored. Now, you guys know that Samantha Markle is my occasional co-host on this show. So Ignacio and I have now decided to become partners at least once a week.
Yes.
We're going to be guest hosting a show, and we're going to talk about crime, the state of the country, and inspiring, from my point of view, inspiring cases especially. But we also have to stay on the crime thing to raise awareness from my perspective as a former, criminal and law clerk, and having served a lot of time in prison, and from Ignacio's perspective of a law and order guy who's, spent a lot of time pursuing really, really dangerous people. So with that being said, welcome to the first episode of our show co-hosting, and welcome Ignacio Esteban.
Thank you, man. It's gonna be fun. I know we've done a lot of shows before, but this is gonna be cool where we ask each other questions, we talk about current events, we talk about our books, and hopefully we get a lot of feedback, and we'll talk more with your audience too and see what they think about everything, which is cool. And of course, everybody will be able to support us also through our books and also through our Patreon sites. If they like what they hear and see, of course, that'll be nice.
And all those links are in the description. My books, Ignacio's books, our Patreons. If you want to donate to what we're doing, going forward, I do crime victim advocacy now, and working with the wrongfully incarcerated people that I believe, and that the facts seem to show that they're in prison innocent. So that being said, Ignacio put out a recent book, The Psycho Killers. Now, it's a really detailed book written from the point of view of an experienced law enforcement officer who puts out books all the time. And this is a wonderfully researched book. Tell us about your book, The Psycho Killers, and let's discuss some of these crazy cases.
Yes. I talk about 12 of them in there. And it's not a super long read. It's about maybe an hour and a half, 2 hour read, which is good for those. And I talk about the Bundys, the Dahmers, John Wayne Gacy's, Jack the Ripper, H.H. Holmes. I talked about Ramirez, D'Angelo, and quite a few others in there. Shipman also. So if you don't know much about some of these really prolific, horrific serial killers, I mean, we can start with Bundy since we both were in Florida. And I don't know if you remember in '89 when Bundy was executed. And you remember finally after 10 years, his trial, and we'll get to how he got there, but his trial was the first trial, what I was reading, that was televised nationwide like it was. It was a big thing, and it was moved from Tallahassee to Miami. And it was like, at that time, it was considered the trial of the century until the O.J. Simpson trial, because Bundy was a character. He even went to law school. He didn't graduate, but he even represented himself. He was a narcissistic. He loved the attention. He was there, and he had really good attorneys that could have helped him. But because his ego was so large, he wanted to be the one representing himself, which was, he made some catastrophic mistakes because it ended up costing him everything. He was convicted and executed.
So Ted Bundy was a serial killer. He was killing a lot of women and co-eds, beating them mercilessly, even while they slept to death, and broke into sorority house. I think it was Gainesville. Was it Gainesville or
it was in Tallahassee? It was Chi Omega sorority house back in the late 70s, and that should never had happened because he had escaped from prison out of Colorado a month or a month and a half earlier. The exact dates in my book, and he walked out of the prison in the jailer's uniform. He was able to crawl through the crawl space in his jail. It was I think New Year's Eve, and he was able to crawl in the crawl space, go into his jailer's office, who's out for the night, put on his clothes, and walked out the front door, folks. If you can't believe that. Wow. And then he was on trains. He was on. He went all over the country, and he settled in Tallahassee about a month later. And then I guess he was trying to get some construction work while I was reading, but they were doing background checks. And he had fake IDs, and he wasn't passing the background checks. So he got frustrated. He got triggered, and he got that itch because at that time he had already killed, I would say, over 30 women already, and he had a thing for his girlfriend because his girlfriend was living with a serial killer and she didn't even know it. Or maybe she did suspect, according to some reports, that she suspected strange things, but he liked a certain type. He liked white females, young white females, hair back herself, parted down the middle. So he had a certain type that he liked. And when he snapped badly. And he went to that sorority house. He committed House of Horrors in there. And I talk about that. And then after he escaped from there, he wasn't arrested then. He escaped the second time. Yeah, then he abducted a young girl from middle school and did horrible things to her. And then a police officer in Pensacola stopped him for having, I think the car that he was driving was stolen, and he fought him, and then he tackled him. And then they started piecing everything together with Bundy, and then he will be charged later for these homicides, and he'll be executed. Old Sparky and Rayford would eventually take care of Bundy. Remember they had the old Bundy burgers? Everybody was talking about the Bundy burgers, and I was in high school then, and I remember that was a big deal back in. He was executed January 1989. That was the big thing with Bundy.
I remember what I do remember about that when it happened. Like he was a law student or something in college. Sure. The women liked him. He was pretty charismatic. He did try to take control of his case, but I do remember that there was the Volkswagen. I think that he was seen.
Volkswagen Beetle. Yes.
It was spotted at one or two events where people had disappeared from, and people remembered that car. I do remember he also escaped another time where he convinced them to take him to the county law library, I guess in the county courthouse.
Yeah.
And it was one or two
floors. That was the first time he escaped.
Yep. And some reason this guy is a serial killer and they know it or suspect it, and they take him with no shackles on, figuring he's too high up to jump. Well, guess what he did? He jumped and escaped. He got out. So,
the second one is to me shocking. How was he able to manage to crawl through the crawl space in there in Colorado again, different facility, and go into the office of the jailer, put on his clothes, and walk out the front door.
I remember the still images, I think, or maybe even the video where that opening was right in the middle of the cell and it was very small. Mm-hmm. And I think he was even losing weight to try to fit through the thing. How did he get up there? That's very hard to muscle up into anything to begin with.
Yeah, he lost the weight. He did what he had to do, and he was gone. And that's why he should never have killed all those. He ended up killing two girls and injured really badly two other girls in a sorority house. And that should never. And then he murdered that young little girl at middle school that he kidnapped her from the school.
It's horrendous, but I wonder, looking back to the families at that time, did they have, go after the jailers or the county for not properly securing him or anything, because ultimately they would have some liability. He should have never been on the street.
No, it's amazing. And how many close calls before that Bundy was almost arrested also. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was stopped with that, in fact, that same Beetle Volkswagen, it's in a museum now where people can look at. I think it's in Kentucky. It's in my book where exactly it is that he used it. So if that's something that piques your interest, you can go check it out. The famous Bundy mobile that he used to commit these horrible acts. And he was really good. And each one of these serial killers gets very good. And some of them, he was quick in killing them. And he was very also good in using nylon stockings and strangling them, right? He would like to have anything that's common, anything that if he gets stopped, like he could justify having it. Why do you have a rope? Why do you have stockings? Right. Why do you have this knife here? Every common house? He had a
plausible explanation for it.
Yes,
plausible explanation.
Yes, that's what he did, and he would remove the front seat of his Beetle Volkswagen, put in the back, so you have more space to deal with the bodies, inside
I
there.
remember this. He was in denial that it wasn't him all along, but I think on the eve of his execution, he agreed to an interview with either Ben Kinchlow or the other guy from the 700 Club. And he did an interview with one of the Christian broadcasters. And he didn't look like his normal happy-go-lucky, charismatic self. He looked like a broken, beaten guy who knew he was dying in the morning. He was like this. He couldn't barely talk. And he confessed to the murders, and he said that it was due to an early childhood addiction to pornography and abuse, I think. He gave his version of things. But, he did speak to a Christian journalist just the eve of the execution.
Yeah. And he still don't know the exact numbers. He confessed to some of them, but many people think, because at that time in the West, when you look at Washington, Colorado, Idaho, a lot of hitchhikers, a lot of runaways disappeared. And at the end, they think his number is even more than 30. It could be even a lot higher, all these young ladies he killed.
You'll be law enforcement. You're aware that, even to this day, there's probably numerous, especially in Canada and, like you said, in rural areas, many serial killers on the loose still. I mean, you have ones that they even suspect are truck drivers, because a lot of murders or disappearances happen along interstates.
Yeah, and these are people, and this is an MO with serial killers. They pick prostitutes, people from the streets, right? Runaway, people that the site doesn't care about. So if they disappear, nobody cares about. And the ones who are really good at it, like sometimes Bundy will get out of control and go for too many too quickly. The ones that pace themselves once every so often never get caught.
Especially in those days, if they're changing jurisdictions, there wasn't a lot of cooperation back then, or databases comparing notes about these unsolved murders.
Yeah, if you look at Richard Ramirez or Joseph D'Angelo, these guys would hit residential homes, right? Your chances of being caught a lot higher. Like when Bundy at the end decided to hit the sorority house, his chances of getting caught get a lot higher, because you're going into resident. And he also, what I was reading, got a sexual charge out of it, right? So you leave your DNA behind also.
It's very similar to this new case in what is it, Utah or Idaho, where the sorority girls were recently murdered. I think there was 3 murders in one house.
Idaho,
months ago. Idaho. So let's track that case as we go forward doing these shows. Let's really try to support the victims there as well, and educate the public about these people.
Bundy was executed within 10 years. Not bad. Not a bad number. Some are longer. There was just one I sent you an article about. This guy, Dewan Owen, who just executed on Thursday in Florida. Not all Sparky anymore. They don't do electrocution anymore. Now they do lethal injection. They changed. Old Sparky was used, I think, since the 20s all the way to the 90s until they retired. I think even 2000s. And then they changed it. This guy committed these atrocities in the mid-80s. 40 years in appeals and fighting it. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
I know, retiring the electric chair in Florida, I was incarcerated down there at the time, and I think 1 or 2 people were executed with like their heads caught fire. It wasn't properly done, and it was like gruesome. So they went to the lethal injection, but then there was a big controversy about supplying the drugs, and some of the drugs weren't killing the people, but they were paralyzing their lungs, and so there was foam and blood, and you can obviously see a real horrific struggle going on. And not that I have sympathy for these people, but you have groups of people that do and make a big deal about it.
I know.
I have no sympathy. Personally, look, I don't agree with the death penalty. I'll put that out there as a Christian. I can't agree with it. However, when it becomes personal, and you think, God forbid, something like that should happen to somebody in my family,
then you want it to happen.
But you'd almost want to take your own retribution, and that you as law enforcement can't go along with that. And me as a guy trying to change can't do that. So what are you supposed to do? Let them just take him through the system, and he's mocking the system. These killers many times just sitting there smiling at the family members or flipping them off or cursing them out instead of just sitting there and taking their punishment. I mean, a lot of these guys, I want to talk about the police officer, the big one, the Golden State Killer. What was his name again?
Joseph D'Angelo. Joseph D'Angelo. That's another one. That's an interesting one there. He started and he went bad, and he would later blame his dual personality, right? That's what he would say later. That it wasn't really him that was doing it. I forgot the name. It's in my book, the name he gave his other alter ego. I think it was Charlie or Jerry or something like that. Right. And he would say it wasn't him doing that. It was this other guy doing that, using his body or something. crazy nonsense people come with. I think they start reading a lot of defenses and books of insanity and stuff like that, where they try to feed on that. But he was a former cop that he was also a burglary investigator. So he became good, and he turned, and I think you can talk about that too, how he became really good at doing residential burglaries. Okay, so he became a thief, right? But then he started raping female victims inside. He became a serial rapist, and then he turned to serial killer.
I remember some of the stories about them. He would rape the women,
Yeah,
usually in front of their husbands or boyfriend, and he would put a stack of plates on the back
yes.
and tie them up loosely, but said, "If you move, I'm going to hear it. I'm going to kill her. I'm going to kill you."
If I hear fidgeting, well, run book, I hear fidgeting, moving, and I hear a plate, shaking, then I know you're up to something. And a lot of clients, they had kids in the house. I'm going to kill your whole family.
I wrote my book about Robert Durst, and I put that in there because I had remembered, some of these stories about people doing that. And there was a time when I walked in and Robert Durst had cut up an animal in my house, and I thought he had killed somebody in my house. And we were running guns at the time, and I pulled the gun out. It was actually a Ruger, like a Mark 4 or 5 target pistol.
Okay.
But, those long barrels, the thick barrels they have.
Mm-hmm.
We used to drill those out with, like, I'm not going to say exactly how we did it, but then you put the tube and the rock wool and you build silencers onto them. And so I pulled that on him, laid him down, and did the same thing, put dishes on him, said, "Until I find out what's going on here, don't move, we're going to kill you." And then this comes out that this guy got arrested. Now, I heard the stories of people doing that, but I didn't remember where I got the idea from, back when I did it to Durst.
Joseph D'Angelo, yeah.
Joseph D'Angelo. There was another big California case. I don't recall if it was in your book that you just put out.
You know what? He wasn't executed. You know that?
He pled out to life or something recently.
He's right now in life because it's interesting how they caught him, because he stopped in the 80s, mid 80s. Mm-hmm. He wasn't arrested until like 40 years, like 30 some years later, like in 2016, 2017. The exact dates in my book when he got arrested, and they had to do from his DNA, because he left the DNA on the scene, right? They had to eventually take it, like his family DNA, and then work their way down and finally figure out it was him years later, right? And they took DNA swabs when they realized this could be the guy, then matched it, finally arrested him. But a lot of the rapes that happened in the 70s, because he was doing this since the 70s,
right?
And he was smart. So be careful, folks. I'm going to tell you what he said, what he looked for. And just be careful, because these are the kind of people that they look for the same thing. So I want you, this is why we're doing the show. Be careful what he said and his confessions. He said he liked residencies that either first he started with single women, right? They were alone. He was the original Night Stalker. Right. He was called the original Night Stalker. And then they changed the name to Ramirez, and they later called him the Golden State. But he was the original Night Stalker. He was a detective, retired, not a detective, I think he was a police officer that did burglary cases. But he was very good at watching people, watching those who had poor security, no dogs, right? They kept the windows open at night, bad lighting, and watched your schedule, how you stood at night, what time you before. When we saw the lights go out, he would spend like maybe a week watching 1 or 2 homes or a block in the bushes or where he was and determining the people. And that's when he would strike. So my advice to everybody who's watching is make sure you have your lights on. Make sure you're close security. If I know it's expensive, you can get security set up, because any signs, and if you don't have it, put signs outside that you do have security.
Right.
They can't tell. Put signs you have security. Put signs you have a bad dog. Put signs to scare people. Make them think twice. That says maybe he's one of those quiet dogs. They're quiet dogs, and you see them out there, and all of a sudden they come at you, and it's bad news for you. So those are things that he said he did, and the kind of victims he had. A lot of times he would walk in there, and he would wake people up with his flashlight. Imagine that. And then
their eyes, so they couldn't see him, right in their eyes.
Jesus, man. And that's why you need to have home defense, folks. Have home defense. And then we can talk about Ramirez too.
My next book is about that. It's how to protect yourself from burglary and home invasion.
Yeah. And
it'll be out hopefully in a week. I was hoping to get it out a few days ago, but I need to get some advanced reviews and all that. But burglary, from my perspective, prevention, with specific recommendations. Now, some of the things you mentioned are good, but I'll give you some other tips for my audience as well. When it comes to the dog thing, like you said, the fear of the unknown is sometimes, if I know what I'm dealing with, I can deal with it, offset it, or do countermeasures, right? Or leave the place alone.
Sure.
But me not knowing what I'm dealing with, The biggest fear I ever had is I would go to a house, and usually the ones I hit were multi-million-dollar homes, so I didn't have to worry about this too much. But sometimes, a middle-class area, okay? And my biggest fear was nobody answers the door. I go in, and it's a SWAT team member, somebody working night shift in the police department who's really very fit and proficient with a gun, and he's asleep. And I walk in on this. That's always been my biggest fear. Now, that being said, I know what deters people. You put a dog bowl about this big with some old dog food or fake dog food in it, and a big chew toy bone, like one of those rawhides, and have your friend's dog chew on it for a few days, and then just bring it back home and set that out by your back door, maybe even by your front door, another one.
They got their attention.
The person thinks you got a giant Rottweiler in there who's trained to be quiet. They're not going in. I know I would give pause. I'll be like, okay, so I'm ringing the bell and I'm knocking. It's not barking, but look at the size of that damn bowl. The psychology. Now,
you have to do psychology. How about have a lot of security signs all over, cameras everywhere? You're being watched.
It helps with the average burglar. And you know what else I hated? There was the occasion when I knew somebody would be out at night. I had ways of getting people's schedules also. And if they were going to be out, I would do nighttime. But what I used to hate, especially that got started really in the 80s, and now it's just about everywhere, was when I go around the side of a house or a backyard, those damn motion-powered floodlights.
Yeah.
Nobody likes the whole world lighting up when you creep around the side of somebody's house.
You need the motion detector lights. Absolutely.
Motion detector lights. Now, motion detecting cameras. I have cameras everywhere, internal and exterior.
Yes, you have to. So do I.
I mean, I don't care anymore because I was under surveillance in prison for so many years. It's second nature. You just don't do anything wrong and you have nothing to worry about, basically.
And I think here's another common sense thing, and a lot of people don't do it, and people take advantage of it. Lock your doors, lock your windows, make it harder to you have to. I know it's sometimes an inconvenience, but I just grew up that way because in South Florida, you just make it, and of course, have the signs everywhere. And if you can't afford it, try to get good security. Because all of a sudden that goes off, and all of a sudden you get a notification. Is everything okay in there? What's going on? They're going to leave.
They're gone. Listen, Ignacio, I can't even begin to tell you. I had ways to case out multi-million-dollar houses on the intercoastal, oceanfront, and gated communities in South Florida. I was prolific, especially in Fort Lauderdale, around Las Olas, Bayview Drive. I hit so many houses there. I cannot begin to tell you how many of those houses were completely unlocked, even though they had advanced security, sometimes good locks, but they had, even for those days, 80s and early 90s, high-end security systems, yet they didn't set them, or a door would be open or a window would be open. That's easily right. 60% of the houses I went in, including Sheriff Nick Navarro. I hit Nick Navarro's house.
You told me that, yeah.
I'm the guy who hit his house. It was in the newspaper and everything.
Yeah.
I go in there. Now, the detective, they catch me years later, and, of course, they give me the opportunity to exceptionally clear the cases. You know what that means, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so for the viewers, that means by South Florida legal and law enforcement parlance, that means that they would literally take me chained up from the jail, and they want to drive me around to all the houses that I burglarized, and they want to clear their cases off their books so they can stop investigating them.
And you won't be charged.
And I won't be charged. I had that deal in writing, and the agreement was, we don't care if you tell us about 100 houses, we'll charge you with 3. And because they had me on 3, I thought it was a really good deal, so I pointed them out. Yeah. I says, hey, do you want to know about Navarro's house? And they basically pulled on the side of the road and said, you hit Navarro's house? This is the burglars. We've been on that case for years. You better tell us the layout of that house and take a polygraph and tell us exactly what you stole to prove what you just said. They took me to BSO headquarters on Broward Boulevard, took me up to a polygraph, and had me draw a floor plan of the house and precisely what I stole. And one of the main things was a detective 5-shot special that was sitting dusty on a guest bedroom nightstand. And I would steal guns, but then I realized how serious it was in Florida to steal guns. You can get a life sentence for armed burglary. Mm-hmm. It turns a regular burglary into an armed burglary if you steal them. So later I started just leaving them behind because the burglary's not worth the life sentence. So I don't say this to glorify, but I say that even the sheriff of the county, the elected sheriff, who was part of the founding of the Cops TV program.
That's right.
The original episodes were all filmed down here with him. Gray hair, the Cuban cop. I'm sure you know exactly who I'm talking about. And that gun was there, and I had armed myself with it because I said, well, if there's one, there's more. I didn't know it was his house. And as I crept across the foyer area, I heard, and I thought somebody drew down on me because I already picked the phone up to see if the alarm system back in those days, I think it was 86, had seized the phone line or not. You'd hear no dial tone if that happened. But I heard a dial tone, put the phone back down. I proceeded to the master bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
When I passed the foyer, there was a click, and I thought somebody had pulled down on me. When I looked over, it was an old school photoelectric eye. He had like an old alarm system, and it had the relay, the noisy relay in there, the electric eye.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, the old school ones. So I said, okay, it was just that. So I ran in the bedroom, checked the phone again, still had a dial tone. I said, okay, got the jewelry box and some other stuff that was there.
Wow. And he didn't have an alarm system?
I don't even know if that was hooked up, and there was an alarm screen. But like I said, it was a guest bedroom, and I just took my chance that day. When I removed that screen from the guest bedroom, it was alarmed. It has the wire throughout the screen. It didn't go off, and then I quickly jumped. I was really fit back then, and I went in and dropped to the floor on my hands, and went to the phone and picked it up to see if I screwed up, and I actually set the alarm off.
So he didn't have it on.
I would always carry the Bearcat programmable police scanners, and I had the dispatch frequencies for Fort Lauderdale, BSO. I would listen to for burglary calls, and so I have that on. I have liquid glove on, this material that concealed my prints somewhat. And when I went when I got the stuff home from the jewelry box, I spread it on the bed, and this is going to be in 2 of my upcoming books. There was a card with the presidential seal, and inside that card it said, "Dear Sheriff Nick Navarro, thank you for your assistance with the South Florida Drug Task Force. Sincerely, President Ronald Reagan." It was in his jewelry box. And then
you left that behind.
No, I got that to my house.
Oh, you did?
Yes, I took the whole jewelry box. And so there was not much jewelry of value. There was other stuff that shouldn't have been there, if you know what I mean. But so this card was there, and his ID card. I got that to the house, and I pulled it out, and I said, "Oh, it's a police officer's house. Oh, well." And then I pulled it back up. I said, "That's the sheriff of the county right now. It's his house."
Wow.
I flew out. I was living with a bunch of Irish girls. I said, "Who wants to go to California?" And we flew out of Fort Lauderdale.
Time to get out quickly. Wow, man. Wow.
My brother-in-law said, "You crazy? That's been all over the news. They are hunting for you everywhere."
But you had no idea that was Nick Navarro until at the end.
I had no idea until years later.
Yeah.
They had me do a floor plan of the house and exactly what I took, and that had not been released publicly. And I remember the detective's name, Sherry Kovrick, and Detective Artie Wolf, Fort Lauderdale burglary, and they were like, you did it. Listen, they took me to a house. They had an undercover operation going on, like an organized crime thing in conjunction with one of the federal agencies, or maybe both. And they had like the secret headquarters where they had flash cash of like $200,000-300,000 in a safe. And this is, I want to say 92, 93. So as I'm driving around showing them houses, they said, "We're going to take you to a building, and we know you're good at what you do. Tell us how you would get in there." And I said, "Well, what is it?" "We'll tell you afterwards." So I looked over the building. We got back. I said, what was that all about? They said that was a secret headquarters for like an operation that we do organized crime stings or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I think it was 200,000 cash was stolen from the safe in there.
Oh my goodness.
And I said, from what I've seen, and there's no forced entry, one of your detectives stole that money. She said, "That's what we're thinking." So,
good info there.
Yeah, their cash disappeared. But
yeah, sad to hear that. But yeah, that's the lessons learned, that you have to fortify. You have to. You got the security system. You got to use it. I mean, and you got the motion detectors. I know it's expensive, but if you can't afford that and you live, let's say, modest means, you just have to do the little things right. And I know people don't like to pay for lighting, but if you light up your house, it's hard to break in. People are watching. The neighbors are looking. If it's so like dark, then you're like a little ninja that goes around there. You don't want that.
That's how I behaved. Unfortunately, I'm not proud of my past, but that was it. I feel terrible for the people I stole from, and I apologize publicly. I've tried to make it right. I've done restitution. Certain things.
I think these kind of shows help enlighten and how to stop people who used to do that from doing that again. I think absolutely.
Let me tell you one more psychological deterrent. Would keep the burglars and the serial killers away from your house. In Brooklyn, I had a little business card back in the day, and I just typed on it, small print. You had to be at my door to be able to read this thing, and it said, "Attention burglars, attention burglars. I may or may not be home. However, I have something inside this house that guarantees you won't be coming out alive."
Yeah. What's the saying there? Forget the dog, beware of owner.
That's right.
And it has a
Something
gun pointing right there.
A 45 beats a call to 911 or something. A bullet beats a phone call.
Yeah, no, and that's not a bad idea either. Letting people know that the owners are armed. You know, people who are driving, a lot of times they have the stickers of different farms they own, like they have Glock stickers or they have Sig Sauer or whatever, and it lets you know what, I know about my guns. Don't be trying to carjack me. Don't be trying to do anything stupid.
See, somebody at my level would look at that. Maybe it's just a psychological ploy, but the average burglar who's strung out on drugs and hitting houses, or the average,
do it.
they're going to find a softer target. They just are.
Yeah, but I've known people that say what they have it, especially with firearms. People don't. I mean, especially if you get very specific, most likely you do have what you're saying.
I remember,
and most people conceal weapons permits.
I remember when I lived in Florida before I went to prison, a lot of the tags of police officers and family members or friends of, they could put a little steel thing onto the tag.
Yes.
The Broward sheriff or police or whatever it was.
Or a little badge.
Yeah, did they outlaw those or make those like inappropriate or something? Because I remember that people were like using them to get out of tickets or something.
Yeah, some people misuse it, but I think it's also it gets the bad guys' attention. Don't mess with it either.
That's exactly right. For carjacking and parked in front of the house for burglary. I used to also hate, I'll tell you this, in Florida, the police in a lot of jurisdictions are allowed to take their police cars home. And they're always backed up in the driveways, like in Hollywood or Davie or these various communities with heavy law enforcement. And I would never go near, the surrounding 10 houses because I didn't know if he was home.
And you don't know if the camera's on the dash cam either, right?
Well, nowadays, yes. Back then,
no. But and there's so many different ways that people don't realize either. So that is another great. If you have a police officer in your neighborhood, thank them, because that's a big deterrent also, because they get nervous. They don't know what's going on.
I was literally a professional burglar. That was I used to do them like this. You'd never see me coming. I would take off the extra jewelry. I slap on a wedding band, and I blend in. Nobody would look twice at me. But I'm a human being too, and I don't want to get killed doing the stupid things I was doing. So yes, I would not go in the surrounding houses when I saw one of those police cars in the driveway, because I knew he lived there and he could be doing his lawn and either remember me or stop me or confront me or question me, and then I have a situation on my hands.
Yeah, and all these scenarios, and of course, the book is called Psycho Killers. It's a good read. It's available on Amazon. If you're a Kindle Unlimited subscriber, we talked a little bit about it, but like I said, it's over 12 serial killers, very detailed what they did, how they did it, and not just in the U.S., but around the world. The one in Russia, the one Pedro Lopez out of South America, which some people think he's still alive and is still the most prolific of all time. Over 300 indigenous children, 300 indigenous children in South America, from Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, and the Colombian authorities let him go in the 90s, and they still think he's at it. I mean, if
what is
stuff
it
like that is shocking.
Like one of those countries, like no matter what you do, it's only no more than 20 years or something.
Ecuador is one of those countries. I couldn't believe it. He did, I think, 15 years for killing an atrocious amount of little children, right? And he got out, and then he kept on going around and kept on doing. Peru just got rid of him. Colombia, they said they couldn't make their case on him and let him go, and they still think he's out there doing. He's now maybe in his 70s, 80s, could be dead, but he's called the monster of the Andes for a reason.
Right.
The monster of the Andes.
Him. The Russian guy, that's one of the ones I don't think I read, but I remember there was a case. Was he the one that was killing people with a hammer?
Yeah, Chiquitolito. Yeah, Chiquitolito. He Andre Chiquitolito. Yeah, he was another one that went for years. But like I said, some of these guys are. But again, they pick kids are by themselves. So always tell your children not to talk to strangers. You're at a bus stop. I mean, at a train station. Hey, he get him drunk. Hey, I'll give you some alcohol. Take him to the back and kill him immediately and dismember him, do bad things to these kids. These guys are sick individuals. Stranger danger. Keep your kids away from them. Tell them how crazy. I think these books are good for you to read so you can see how these people operate and teach your children what to do. I do with my daughters. I mean, you don't know somebody, don't talk to them. People, keep away, and never go with somebody where you don't know where they're going. Right. Bundy was a master of that, by the way. One quick story about Bundy. Him and his famous Beetle Volkswagen, right? He had a crutch, right? Because this is one of the things that caught his girlfriend's attention. He's not hurt. Why does he have all these crutches in his house for? So he would always play. He had a sling. His arm is a sling. He's not a crutch. He's limping. He has his full of books and always asking a young female for help. And once he gets them in the car, lights out, knocks them out, and takes them off to whatever he's going to do to them. And he was a master doing that.
You remember Silence of the Lambs factored that into the story because the killer, Buffalo Bill, whatever his name was on the show with Jodie Foster,
yes,
he had his hand in a sling or whatever, and would ask a lone woman, "Hey, could you help me load this couch?" And of course, she'd jump in there first and lift the light end of the couch, and he'd push it and jump in behind her and knock her out, and that was it.
You can see all, and history repeats itself, and these people keep on doing the same things that worked then. They keep on doing it also. I know you're from Brooklyn. I don't know if you remember Albert Fish, the vampire of he was the original boogeyman. He was the original one, and he was the vampire of Brooklyn. And an interesting story on him. Eventually, he was executed, but he's the same one that would make your kids disappear. Another guy there, but he was so messed up that this eventually got him caught. And I'll tell a quick story here. He would write a letter tormenting the parents about it, saying he heard information, how it happened in so much detail where you knew he was the one that did it. And some of these guys are sick like that. But it cost him because he didn't. And I brought it more detail in the book. The stationery was very unique that he wrote it on. And the detectives at the time were able to track him down and arrest him. And he was convicted of that particular murder because he told the parents, I'll tell you a little backstory how he got her. He told, this is 1930s. Like you said, New York City, right? Different times we're looking at. And he looks at the local paper, and a lot of times you'll see these young kids looking for work, and he wanted to work on a ranch. So he came in the premise that he's going to come and hire their kid who's maybe 15 or 16-year-old to work on his ranch outside the city, right? That was his premise. That way he can see and scope out, meet young children or whatever. And he went out there, but he saw the daughter. She was even younger, maybe 12, 13. He liked her better. He told the parents, hey, listen, I have a niece that's having a birthday party. I can take her that far and then bring her back. They just met this guy. Don't ever give your children to anybody.
So lets their kid go. It's my God.
And he took her. They never saw her again. He did horrible things to her. He wrote about it. Torments him 2 years later about all the stuff. But he didn't say it was him. He said he heard a story, which was BS.
Right.
It was pretty much a confession. He said he spent 10 days eating her, pretty much doing all these. He said her rumpus, all these horrible things he did to her. Imagine doing that to somebody. Eventually, he was executed in New York City for that. I think it was lethal injection years later.
Wow.
The vampire of Brooklyn.
I remember the story. I didn't remember the whole thing.
Albert Fish.
A horrendous guy like him that's in your book. The guy that had the murder castle during the World's Fair in Chicago.
H.H. Holmes. H.H. Holmes.
Wow. What a case that is.
What people think who is Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
A lot of people think he's Jack the Ripper also. And a case be made on that. So if you're interested in H.H. Holmes, he was also a physician. The person, because he allegedly they think he was also in London in late 1888. His parents were British immigrants. They came to the United States. He became a doctor, went to the University of Michigan, a physician. He was very notorious also when he was in college, stealing bodies from the graves and selling them to the medical schools so they can study them, what have you.
Right.
And he was involved in a lot of heinous things, a lot of heinous stuff. And a lot of people thought that a lot of people that worked at his hotel that he bought for getting ready for the Chicago Fair back in, it was at 1893, right?
I think that's the first one where electricity was shown to the world.
Yeah. A lot of things that were going on there.
Light bulbs.
A lot of his employees and guests were disappearing. A lot of stuff like there. A lot of people think he was there in London because the person, Jack the Ripper, had to be, some people saying, a surgeon physician, which was his skill set he had. Disembowering the victims very quickly within 2 minutes. The stuff he was doing, he had the skill sets. They said he was there. A boat that came back during that same time at the end had name H. Holmes on it, right? A little bit unique also there. And a handwriting sample, the person who claimed to have done this wrote something matches his. So he died pretty bad too. I
think he was getting the bones and the organs and selling them to medical centers back in those days. Yeah. Because there was no checks and balances in that. It was just in demand. So there was a lot of grave robbing. He, from my recollection of a show I saw about the case, would have gas piped into the rooms, into the guest rooms. And literally, when they would succumb, I think one of the stories is a lot of the rooms had a chute. He would go and put the bodies in the chute. They go right into the basement. So there was passageways. He had secret passageways. He had the murder castle was a gigantic building
Yeah,
built
and
for
he
killing
could
people.
cremate them. There's a cremator not far from him either.
That's exactly right. Yep. There's a post office on that spot now, by the way.
Yes.
They tore that down and built the post office there. A lot of people say the basement's haunted and all this stuff, but interestingly, I forgot to tell you this the other day. I got a proposition from some producer in England who found out about me and likes what I'm doing, and he's doing a brand new movie about Jack the Ripper, and he wants to cast me in it. He says, "Are you allowed to come to London?" I says, "I can look into it, but yeah, count me in." So, send me the information. So that'd be pretty crazy if I get cast as H. Holmes or something.
Out there. Wow, Jack the Ripper. Wow, look at that. That's
I
interesting.
can't believe this guy reached out. He wants to cast me in a Jack the Ripper movie. I'm like, I can't.
But as a main character or as something else.
I don't know the details yet.
Oh.
But I looked him up. He's like,
That'd be cool. Hey, any experience, any networking, that's awesome.
Oh my God, yeah, that would be pretty cool. John Atwood wants me to go out there to do some shows. We need to go out there together, me and you, and do some shows.
I would like to. I reach out to him if he's watching. I'll let Sean know. I'll do a show with him. I'll be a good show.
Some of these big shots, they're hard to reach, man. Sean's great, but he's not easy to reach.
Yeah. I think he knows my background. I think it'll be a really entertaining show. I've done one, I think, with Steve Gillen. I tell you about that one. He's a big name out there.
Yep.
And others. And I've done international stuff, domestic stuff, and it's just going big. And hopefully we'll get a TV series going. You have some contacts, and I have some other ones, and we'll keep on going forward. I think with that, the script is good. I think it's if you're looking for something, it's a well professionally done script. I work with a professional based on my autobiography, ATF Undercover, dealing with repeat violent offenders, gang members, armed drug dealers, international firearms traffickers, armed home invaders, and a lot of stuff in there. I think it'd be pretty cool.
I have a couple of connections. Like I said, I'll try to plug you into. Hopefully, this week I can actually try to do that. I do want to get to something else. Everybody knows, and you mentioned earlier, you wrote the book, Psycho Serial Killers. Check out his book in the description and ATF Undercover. I wrote a book about Robert Durst, who I knew for a brief time. And I believe from things he showed me that he's the wealthiest serial killer in American history. My book, Sex and the Serial Killer, My Bizarre Times with Robert Durst, has been out for a few years now. Nancy Grace covered it on her podcast while I was still incarcerated. She put it on her podcast. It's been in the National Enquirer, the New York Post, a bunch of publications. So check that book out. And some of the things he told me and had around him, he was really all about like abusing women and then finishing them off. And I kind of felt he was trying to groom me, because I would let him use my place once in a while, and he'd have women down there, and I kind of turned a blind eye to that because he was paying me, but it was for his, threesomes or whatever he was doing. And it became really weird. He showed me pictures of dead women, and and then there was an incident that I came back and he was in a green dress covered in blood, and I pulled a gun on him. I told the story earlier, and I laid him down on the bed, and I said, "Who did you kill in my house? What the F is wrong with you?" And
in a green dress?
Yeah, he was used to wear a dress and get high, and then he was a freaky dude. He had a transsexual over there one time, but he was just a horrific human being. Anyway, he got convicted finally in Los Angeles. We went to the trial about a year and a half ago. They wouldn't let us in because of COVID. You had to have advance notice to get permission to go into the trial. But I spoke briefly with the prosecutor, and I spoke with his attorney, Robert Durst's attorney, for murdering Susan Berman. She's a famous screenwriter. Her father was a gangster in Las Vegas. So he murdered Susan because she had information about the murder of his wife in New York. She was his alibi for the murder of Kathy Durst. And the prosecutor, shook my hand and everything. And I had to refresh his memory who I was. He goes, "I thought you were still in prison. How the hell did you get out to Los Angeles to my courtroom?" I said, "I've been out a few weeks, and I'm out here supporting the victims." And we pretty much left it at that. And then his lawyer came out, and his lawyer was Dick DeGaran from Texas.
Oh, you're talking about
that. He represented the guy from Waco. What was his name? David Koresh.
David Koresh. Yeah.
And one of the top defense lawyers if you have a murder case in that state, in Texas, or even nationally, I guess. So he has Dick DeGaran and a team of like $6 million worth of lawyers streaming out behind him during a recess. I'm there. Court TV is there. All these other outlets are there. And I know Dick. I had met with him years ago when he was. I'm not going to say what happened because liability issues, but some words years ago over Durst, and so he knew who I was. He knew my book had come out exposing other things they didn't want out right before the trial, and so he came out. He laid eyes on me. His eyes got this big, and in front of the bailiff and everybody, he yelled at me, "Cannibalism!" I said, yeah.
It's cannibal too. He was like a Dahmer. Was he like a Dahmer?
Wow, yeah. This one girl that I saw there with him alive with cherry tattoos was later clearly deceased
Cannibalized.
with photos, and he said the cherries were the best part. That he ate her, and he had utensils on her stomach in the
It's like,
photographs.
you know, find how sick a lot of these guys are.
Oh,
Albert Fish was like that, and remember this German guy, Joachim Kroll. Kroll.
mhm.
He was another a guy who cannibalized small kids, and he was one. Yeah, he got caught at the end because he had kidnapped a small girl in his apartment complex. He had got her out already, but he was flushing her intestines down the toilet,
Yeah.
and it clogged the system. And the neighbors were complaining, and one of them had a background in medicine. They could smell this was human smell. Called the authorities, and when they came in there, what they saw was this member. And when they looked at the boiling pot, there were the two hands inside there. That's
I
a
feel
sick.
bad for the investigators, the victims, their families. The investigators have to see this shit and deal with it. Excuse me.
That's hard. That's hard to process. That's hard. But people need to prepare. The lesson learned: protect your children. Don't let them wander out by
I knew
themselves.
an ATF agent that we both know that you know that he was one of the people on scene at the Parkland shooting, and how he was, the bodies were everywhere, the blood, the massacre, all these kids, and he's a really good guy, but I think he was a little screwed up over having to see that mess.
No one ever likes that. I mean, I respond the day after, and you're out there, and it's I didn't see the bodies, but you deal with the victims during the interviews, the families.
You went to Parkland also?
I did. I responded
without naming his name. You know who we're talking about then, because he was out there as well.
Well, a lot of people were out there, but and I talk about my book. One of the battles, the FBI had the audacity to have us kicked off the scene that we're helping process, telling BSO because they're headbutting with us, saying that we were contaminating the scene, which was wrong. There are so many battles. I talk about my book, ATF versus the FBI, the rivalry within DOJ. That's one of the things I personally saw, and I talk about in my book also. And Nicholas Cruz, the rifle he bought at a federal firearms licensee, at the time he was at 18, but Florida changed the law later. You have to be 21, just like handguns, to buy rifles. Which again, I don't agree with that because you're punishing. You have bad individuals, but a lot of these guys at 18 are in the military, or a lot of these guys are gun enthusiasts. Why are you punishing everybody because of a bad individual? And he should have been executed, in my point. In my opinion,
after that massacre, it was Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, and respect for the victims, prayers for the victims and their families. Didn't he get away from the scene and was caught late
at a subway
or Margate or something?
No, he was at a subway. He was hanging nearby at a subway. He left the high school, but I blame also for the BSO resource officer for not going in there. Right? Yep. He stayed outside.
He stayed. I saw the video of him standing outside. He never went in on.
He never went in, and the coaches and other students are trying to tackle him with a rifle, with an AR-15 style rifle, and he's gunning them down. And he sat there. He had a weapon. At least he can put some gunfire. Do something.
I think nobody knows how they're going to act. You wish you could be a hero. But under fire, maybe some people are just too scared to die. Look, I'm not giving him any. He's got training to go in. That's what he signed up.
That's what we pay him, right?
That's what he signed up for. So I know you wrote a book about that. So you give a shout out to your book about solutions and stuff like that.
Yeah, I have quite a few books and all that stuff from the worst mass shootings in U.S. history and how stuff is happening again, which is really detailed book. Not just Parkland, but I talk about the Sandy Hook. I talk about Las Vegas. I talk about what happened at Pulse nightclub. I talk about Uvalde, Texas. That was the worst of the worst. That was the worst response. But then they got better in Nashville and in Kentucky. They responded immediately and they handled their business.
Immediately they went in. Listen, Ignacio, now for my audience, this is episode 1 of a whole new thing I'm doing once a week with Ignacio Esteban, retired ATF agent. We're going to wrap this one up. We're going to come back to you here on a regular scheduled show. We're yet to set the schedule, but these are going to be coming out on a regular basis now. Thank you for joining. Please add comments, hit like and subscribe. And by all means, go to the links in the description. Check out Ignacio's books. Please check out my books. Support us in what we're doing, our Patreon
sites. Yeah.
I'm new at this. I'm not even sure exactly how Patreon works, but I know it's an opportunity for me to at least in some way, be compensated. I'm getting on my feet post-incarceration.
Yes.
I'm trying to share from my experiences to help people. And Ignacio, from his experience in law enforcement, he still has a heart to help people. So he's trying to educate the public here.
We're educating the public. And again, I don't get paid for this. This is my time and my own research. It's something that helps just take care of some things, which is great. And we've done a lot of shows. So if you like this one, please look at the other shows we've done also in the past. I think I did his inaugurated show, and on Rumble, it is still I think one of the best shows, almost 10,000 views. So that's done pretty good.
That's phenomenal. Okay, it was great to have you here as a co-host. Now, let's keep this moving forward.
Let's keep rolling.
Everybody, this is William Steele, True Crime, and Steele a Spotlight TV and radio. Again, I now do public relations, so look me up if you want to get on all my platforms and watch the kind of awesome press releases I'm capable of writing and that I do write. And usually attached to my name with millions of fans, you're going to do pretty well and get a good response.
Good deal.
Thank you again for joining.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys.